things you own end up owning you.
What's going on, good people? Welcome back to the podcast. If you've been following the show, you'll probably already know my two guests. They are Kyle Mamounis and Danny Roddy. Kyle has a PhD in nutritional sciences, and Danny Roddy is an independent health researcher. In this episode, I wanted to talk about a couple of other podcasts that were about sugar. The rest I explain in the episode. I love talking to my brothers Kyle and Danny, and I hope you enjoy this one. Danny Roddy, Kyle Mamounis.
Yeah.
Backstreet Boys are back in town. Backstreet's back, all right. Welcome back in, guys. Thanks for coming on. I wanted to talk to you guys. I brought you guys on to talk about this thing called sugar. Okay, and it's because, I became aware of these two podcasts that were by Peter Attia. Okay, and just to give a little background, back in my low carb days, I think you guys followed the same guys. We followed guys like Rob Wolf, Mark Sisson, and then I became aware of Peter Attia. And like all kind of typical functional doctor, current day guys, kind of, the organic ones or whatever, he recommends a lot doing a low carb diet. He recommends fasting a lot. So he's always constantly doing these, literally 2 to 3 day fasts, just drinking Topo Chico and nothing else, and just, doing his thing. And so, I try to keep up a little bit, somewhat, in that scene, just to see, what's happening currently. And so, and I saw that he posted this thing on his membership site, which I had to pay $20 for, by the way. Just want to let everybody know.
Is that monthly or?
Yeah, monthly. Yeah. You guys
$20 a month.
Yeah, dude, I gotta unsubscribe from that before I forget, because I'll probably end up doing it.
Attention.
Yeah.
For low carb podcasts.
$20 a month. Yes. So he did this podcast called The Deep Dive on Sugar. I think it's podcast number 141 or something like that. You can find it just with that name. And they talk about sugar and replacers for sugar and those sort of things. And in the middle of the podcast, they're talking about a lot of things they're referring to are from Robert Lustig's research. And Robert Lustig, if people don't know, he's like, how would you guys define him? Like also sort of an anti-sugar advocate, or what would you call him? YouTube star. Yeah, a doctor that's very anti-sugar.
Yeah.
Right.
I know, just...
And so I realized that, I should listen to that podcast too. So, long story short, I listened to both podcasts, and I thought that you guys should have too. And I kind of want to break those things down and talk about them. And before that, though, you guys both have had experiences with Lustig, because you both have been at the ancestral health symposiums, right? Which, by the way, if I would have went, the one that was in LA, I would have probably met. Did you go to that one too, Danny?
Yeah, 2011 was the only one I went to.
Yeah, I would have met you guys, but oh well. Anyways, yeah. So, what were your experience? And Danny even has a great picture of Mr. Lustig. So I just want to get just a quick touch on your experiences with the whole Lustig thing, and just meeting him and listening to his conferences, just to to let people know that you guys aren't just talking shit about somebody you never met or you don't know about, and because you guys both have been clearly aware of him for 10, 15 years, whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I know him or anything. I think I shook his hand, and there was people. He was like a minor celebrity there, and so people surrounded him and were asking him questions. And it used to be on YouTube, but I think I asked him how do fruitarians get by with their massive fructose consumption? Uh-huh. And he said something like, "Oh, that's because they eat fiber with it." And then the two other things I remember is him falling asleep during one of the presentations, which I got a photo of. And then he pulled out his laptop and he checked the view count of his Sugar, the Bitter Truth, and then closed the laptop and put it back in the sleeve. I'm not making that up. Those are the two. Oh, and one more thing. Rob Wolf and Matt Lalonde gave him a standing O after his presentation. And those are the only things I remember.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. And Kyle?
I don't think I actually met him. I was there for his talk, and He was because he had just gotten famous at that point. And so I think he was kind of like Gary Taubes 2.0.
Yeah.
And it was like you were cool if you were on the Lustig thing. And I don't know, it just had a lot of energy around it. And you could tell there was a buzz in the room when he was going to give his talk and all that kind of stuff.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I think it was like a little over that hump. I remember some people started to be really skeptical of him, especially with his like, when they talked about it in the podcast, but his push for like regulation. I remember that being like leaving a really bad taste in some people's mouth and being like, what is this dude doing? Oh, he wants to like tax sugar. Like, okay, that's going overboard. And so, but I would agree with you. I think he was at his height of his powers, but also like people were becoming skeptical of him, I think.
Yeah, well, I get that crowd is kind of libertarian leaning. So yeah, that would probably rub them the wrong way.
Do you guys remember what his talk was? Was it just like the typical kind of, sugar's back kind of thing? Was there something specific he was talking about? Was it like a fructose talk or?
Yeah, fructose.
Fructose talk? Okay.
It's very similar, I think, to what he talked about with Peter.
Right. Okay, so which podcast did you guys listen to first? Did you listen to... I think maybe we should talk about... What? I think we should talk about the Lustig podcast, eh?
Okay, either one.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one was good. It was fine. It was like practical. It was about if you don't want to eat sugar, and they just talked about I don't really think anything they said in the one with whoever the guy. It seemed like Peter Attia has some type of associate that maybe does research for him or something and prepares materials, and they talked together.
Well, he said there was a team that assembled that podcast, and that's where the $20 went.
Well,
he said it in the beginning. He said we're not prepared for this, and that too there was a team of people that worked on this, and I was like kind of blown away because I thought they were setting it up like it was a magnum opus of sugar research.
That's what I thought too. And it kind of ended up not being that. But hey, $20. At least it wasn't $100. But I took one for the team, boys. So when the podcast starts, when Peter has a talk with Lustig, they sort of give this. Lustig sort of gives this, like, he asks him to break it down. Glucose versus fructose. Tell us about these things, and he mentions one thing where he says, your body has this fail-safe, right? If you're not getting enough glucose, which the low-carbers just, love and come all over on, is called gluconeogenesis, right? Just, they said it, gluconeogenesis. But, it's something that happens, right, that when you're not consuming sugar, that your body still wants sugar, so it does this process. Okay. Then the next statement, and I quote, and he says, but fructose is completely vestigial, okay?
Yes, he says that.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Going to pass this one to Kyle.
Pass it on to Kyle.
Well, first of all, so I did listen to the sugar substitute one first, and that one was like, it was a little bit shorter. It was under an hour, I think. And then I put this one on, and Peter Attia spent a decent amount of time, like 5 minutes or so, introing this one, and he talked about being on the plane with Lustig and them like nerding out over data on a laptop.
Yes.
And I actually got a little intimidated that there would be some high level material, because it's early 2021, and I'm not at the height of my powers in terms of like talking about metabolism and sugar and fatty acids. Like, I was just rereading something in my dissertation. I don't even know how. I think I was trying to find a paper that I had published, and I just like Googled my name, and the dissertation popped up. So I just clicked on it, and I didn't know it was fully available. And I was reading it. I was reading the intro, and there's just all kinds of stuff I don't know anymore that I knew. So anyway, so I was worried about that, and then they come out of the gate with. At one point, he said, like really early on, right around the vestigial comment, he said, "Bacteria are plants." You know what I mean? Like bacteria,
right?
He said they're plants.
Well, Yeah, what he's driving at, could you explain that to us?
Well, okay. So I wrote a lot of notes on this because, like, right out of the gate, I was like, oh, okay, like, whew, nothing to worry about. So yeah, he said fructose is a vestigial sugar, and first of all, that was strange to say because he preceded that statement saying that glucose is just used by every living thing, including bacteria.
Yeah.
So if fructose is vestigial because it's only used in like non-animal or pre-animal life, but then he just said glucose is used in anyway, it's just a weird thing to say. It's like saying one thing is antiquated because it's really old, but then saying something that's older is like A-okay. And then he said it's not for animals, it's plant stored sugar. And then he said it's plant food.
Yeah.
So this is like exactly wrong.
That was my impression. So just to reiterate one more time. He says that glucose is a super important thing, which your body has a fail-safe for, and it's very important, and everybody should probably, he doesn't talk about diet. They really do end up not talking about too much diet, right? Like what people should eat. It's more like just don't eat sugar and don't eat processed foods, which the processed foods could be, it's like, okay, it's good, I guess. But then, and then he says that fructose is just this completely useless thing, even though it's found all over the place. And
you would take away that it was only good to kill you if you like took
pretty much
everything.
Yeah, that's how it sounded. I mean, really, that's what I was like. Wow, Jesus Christ, this guy is serious. And like you, Kyle, I expected some next level shit because I was like, man, maybe I don't know something here. And so keep going, Kyle. You were gonna say something. Sorry, man.
Yeah, so plants don't like consume fructose. I mean, plants don't like plant food. There's a lot of different ways you could use the term plant food, but to specifically say fructose is plant food rather than glucose just doesn't make any sense. I mean, plant cells use both, like they transport their sugars a lot of times with sucrose, which is why, like, especially long plants, you can find like sugarcane, and in trees and stuff, the sap, it's usually a lot of sucrose. And then they break it down, and unlike humans, so the big difference, what he should have said if he was smarter, is animals have much more specialized tissues than other life forms, especially bacteria, but also plants. And so we like our liver preferentially takes up fructose at a pretty high rate. And whereas plants, it's more just like all of their cells they're much less selective in their enzymes for using sugars. And they have different priorities. Like they're worried about transporting and storage and stuff. But I mean, it's just retarded because so they store glucose. Like plant storage is glucose for them to later consume. And that's what starch is. And everybody knows that. That's not like a difficult thing. And fruit, right, where the fructose is, it's not stored. It's not plant food. And it's not plant storage because plants can't ever get at that. That's gone. Like when they make fruit, that's the end of their life. It's like a human reproductive cells, like you don't consume those for nutrition. That's like the end of the life cycle. And they specifically put fructose in it to get animals to eat it, to spread the seeds, right? Like it's just basic, the relationship between plants and animals. And so they're literally making it to be animal food on purpose. Like they specifically make something that will attract animals, thus making it animal food. And so it's exactly wrong, everything that he said.
Yeah, I don't know. Could you even understand why he would say that? I didn't really understand what the point was.
I don't think it was essential. I mean, it sounds wrong, but I don't think it was essential to his argument, or was it?
Yeah.
I think it was like it was just.
Well, no, he's just setting it up. Like it just, to me, it's a tell that everything he's going to say, which I think ended up being confirmed, is through this lens. That he sets up this lens because.
Yes.
What ends up happening? Like I'll just say like the overall take, and then we can go section by section. But he takes a lot of things that are sort of true, or he takes a lot of information. And if you just have one presupposition that fructose is bad, then you can come to all the conclusions he comes to. But if you don't analyze that and you say things like, Well, fructose is just bad. Like, he basically says it's just bad. It just is.
Right.
I don't want to, like, I shouldn't have to explain that to you. It's not animal food.
Yeah.
It's like ancient evil, vestigial, like, it's
Yeah.
like if your appendix was like trying to kill you.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, if a person clearly has no clue what's going on, they would just think, okay, so I shouldn't eat fruit then, because it has fructose in there, right? That's where we get that word from.
To be fair, he does give a big up to fructose, better repleting glycogen, but then he immediately shits on it a second later.
So we'll talk about that later. So another thing he says, then going on, he talks about the Maillard reaction, right? The Browning reaction, which is, you know, like, Kyle likes that one, which, you know, I'm going to give his take, what he said, right? He says that, you know, that's what's going on. Glucose is responsible for this reaction, right? It's part of this whole system of over time. We're basically cooking and browning our tissues, and that's, you know, what's leading to death. And you can do it in an oven at 350, or you could do it at 98.6 degrees, which, by the way, nobody is anymore. But anyway, 98.6 degrees over 70 years, and, you know, there you go. There's your average lifespan. So, you know, and then he says that fructose causes that to happen at a rate 7 times faster. I have no idea where he got that from.
Is this the same thing as advanced glycation end products, the Maillard reaction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's a kind of glycation. And it's of, like, I think it's of specific residues.
Okay,
but so that's true. I mean, it's true that fructose is more reactive than glucose. That's basically why glucose is the preferred circulating sugar.
And is that in a test tube or is that in a person?
Well, it's everywhere, but in a person you also need other stuff. Like you need conditions like with catalysts, like metal catalysts, and maybe some extra oxygen and stuff like that floating around. But the problem with that is there's not a lot of fructose in circulation ever, even if you consume it.
And why is that?
And also, well, first of all, bananas don't brown because of that reaction. They don't do that.
Yeah.
That's like, again, he's just doing the same thing where he's like, oh, bacteria are plants. And like, I actually, this is like driving me crazy. Because why does he have to add that? Why does he have to add that little, it's like a color commentary, you know, like in a sports cast. Like he's doing this color commentary, but he's just lying because the bacteria, like, so bananas ripen because of an enzyme, and also they let out ethylene, and it ripens. Because there's pigments, there's yellow pigments that first they're green and they become yellow and then they become brown, and most of them are in the skin and some of them are in the flesh. It's not the sugar, like the sugars are not breaking down and they're not attaching to proteins, because that reaction is sugars attaching to proteins. There's hardly no proteins in the banana. That's not what's making it brown. And specifically, actually, at Rutgers, the nutrition department that I was in, there was also a food science department, and they were kind of friends, and sometimes they acted like they were the same department. And but it's totally different. It's like science for how to make food last longer on the shelf, or what it's mostly like the processed food industry research division. And somebody I knew, though, they worked in a lab that looked at bananas, and their lab would just be full of, like, on the floor, like plastic bags of rotting bananas, and they would do things to them to try to make them just take longer to do that. And one of the things that has been looked at, and this is why it's amazing how perfectly wrong he is. One of the things they've looked at is Maillard reaction end products to inhibit the what's the enzyme? It's like polyphenol, whatever the enzyme is that ripens the pigments in bananas and then makes them turn brown. That's inhibited by some of the Maillard, the glycated amino acid products. So that, like, the industry has actually looked at that to, like, slow down browning of bananas. So there's just something really bizarre that he would pick these anecdotes to, like, color his commentary that are so incorrect consistently.
Oh, man. So and just to summarize, like, he's just saying, hey, a really bad thing happens in your body, right? Right.
And then okay, he's capturing people's imagination with something they're familiar with. He's saying what's happening to bananas, because everybody knows there's a lot of sugar in bananas, fruit sugar. Okay. So, okay, lots of fruit sugar in bananas. What do bananas do? They get brown and nasty. What happens in your body when you have too much sugar? You get brown and nasty. It's just like the Dr. Oz, like pouring cholesterol and it's all thick and stuff and acting like that's what happens in your arteries. And that's what makes arteries clog when you eat saturated fat and cholesterol, because those things, when they get cold, they get like lumpy and thick, right, in an aqueous solution.
So if butter is hard, same thing's gonna happen in your butt, in your arteries. Is gonna
right. So he's doing that.
Right.
He's doing that.
But with fructose.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Like, I remember it must have been 3 or 4 years ago. I think I made a meme on Facebook about, like, it was like the baton passing meme, and it was like bad science was the baton, and it was from cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease to sugar causes insulin resistance. Because it's the same tactics.
A lot of these I had never heard before. I must be like out of the anti-fructose loop, but the Maillard thing, I had never heard that fructose is inherently increases oxidative stress. I heard the uric acid thing, which I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, it was like it would take, I think, a long time to dissect all of these, because you would have had to look up all the papers he said. But yeah, it was a lot of things I never heard.
Yeah, that was the other big one that I wanted to bring up, is the uric acid thing. So, you know, when he says when you consume fructose, your uric acid goes up, and it's going to cause, it can cause like gout, stuff like that. Is that the point of it?
Well, can I actually add something in? I feel like this conversation has to be contextualized with Kyle's kind of point of your video, that we are kind of, they are like talking about this thing outside the scope of any narrative of what creates good health and bad health. Like, who knows what Lustig like thinks leads to good health, and that's why it's such like a weird conversation, at least for like my listening. It was kind of bizarre. Yeah. And also they talk about like stress and cortisol later in the thing, like increasing lipogenesis and how bad it is. But again, they don't connect it earlier. And then, so yeah, it's just like a hodgepodge of random buffet of ideas that don't really connect to each other.
Yeah,
but
because it's not like they took studies of people that just ate fruit because they ate a lot of fructose and compared that to people that didn't eat any fructose, right? They haven't done that. Maybe they've done something very close to that, or I don't know, I doubt very close, but something similar, right? People eating, I don't know, not even. Kyle's shaking his head, not even. So yeah, so that's the point with all these kind of studies, dweebs. And that's why myself, I've been kind of over the years just pulling back more and more away from those sort of things, because just like you said, people focus on, you know, that one thing happens. Okay, fructose causes this bad thing to happen. Okay, so that means that if you eat fructose and you're a human, and it's like it's going to cause all this bad stuff to happen, but it's just not the case. There's so many other things going on, your lifestyle, what else are you eating, what else are you eating around it, what else are you not eating, right? Maybe you're eating a lot of PUFA, you're not eating a lot of PUFA, all kinds of stuff. So it's very hard to... It's very difficult, because on the other hand, you have that, you know, as a scientist or one of those kind of guys, you want to create this, right? You want to like give the answer, like we found it, but it's so hard to study that answer. It's so hard to come up with a question that, or an answer that answers that question. You know what I mean? No, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, they're just not doing it. And yeah, so I'm trying to develop like my point here about Lustig, which is that he's doing like, this is not, he jumps, well, they don't jump around. They go point to point. It's fairly well organized. It doesn't feel tangential. It feels, you know, processional or whatever. But he starts off with these like wacky anecdotes and kind of factoids that are wrong about sort of like basic biology, you know, like, oh, well, as you know, it's like if you started off talking about, you know, like cell water, and you sort of talking about like, oh, the oceans, and you know what I mean? You say a bunch of stuff. It's like almost poetic. It's like this little intro, but you can't just make shit up. And you do that to sort of make a sort of an emotional connection to the audience. But the other thing is, the reason why he never actually says what he thinks is healthy, because he knows that his market has already will fill that in. So it's the same thing with like on the news. This is basically how the news lies to people is, well, you've got like Hollywood in the news, right? So Hollywood like teaches people how to dream about the nature of the world. Like, this is what happens. You know, these are like, this is kind of how the world works or whatever. And then if you report something on the news, like let's take like the Russia election thing from 2016. Even if everything they said that whatever Russian officials or whoever working on behalf of perhaps the Russian government, who knows, were done, it doesn't matter anyway, because every country of any standing does that to every other country, every one of their election cycles. And specifically for the United States of America to make a criticism about interfering in the elections of another country is, I mean, it's like just levels of like insane hubris that shouldn't even be possible. And yet they are able to get approximately half of the news consuming voting public to believe in this as scripture, because they simply just talk about it and don't talk about other things that would contextualize it. So likewise, if you wanted to not lie, like actually literally lie, but deceive somebody in the field of nutrition or something, and you already know there's this whole cottage industry that has this narrative, and then you just let people fill in that, of course we know fructose is bad, and then you kind of tell them, oh, here's how we know it's bad. And you're not actually, he actually never tells people to go on a low carb diet or anything like that. But it's just like the George Bush administration, when they were like, they would talk about 9/11 and then they would talk about Saddam Hussein, and there was some like research thing where most Americans thought Saddam Hussein had done 9/11, but they never lied, right? They never lied about it. So it's the same thing. So he knows that there's this, that his audience, he's preaching to the choir, and they just want to be like made to like soothed with like, yeah, man, like bananas and fructose is it's just totally vestigial. I don't even like, you don't know, you haven't heard that, like
it's plant food, bro.
Yeah.
I would think he's a true believer, though. I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, I think he really does think fructose is harmful. But you think he's genuinely lying, or lying by omission?
Oh no, I think there's a sort of a third option, because I think a lot of the people that report the news also think they're reporting the truth and they believe it, but they've kind of tricked themselves into that misleading like they can't see that the tactics they're doing are misleading because they're so factionalized,
or it's a greater good type of situation.
Yeah, but even to the point where I don't even think after a while they go through a moral, they just, I don't know, it's really hard to get into other people's psychology. But yeah, obviously if somebody's a certain level of intelligent, you'd expect that they'd have to see certain things. And the thing is, see, he's seeing people at the clinical level, and it's true that if you take somebody who's diabetic or something and make them stop drinking like 5 cans of Coke, they could probably drop some weight. But that doesn't mean that the obesity epidemic is caused by fructose. So he set up this Mott and Bailey, where he's constantly bouncing back between extremely broad general statements like people should just eat real food and like a not that processed diet, and then the Bailey that he's actually putting forward, but it's not defensible, is that fructose is causing every problem of like modern metabolic disease. And then he just falls back to the castle and is like, well, you know, I just think people should and so it's this mix of a very reasonable, almost like nonsense statement. Like just everybody actually thinks you should eat real food, except like the 10 guys that drink like Soylent every day or something as all their meal replacement.
Well, so yeah, that was one thing that I also wanted to point out, is like when they talk about eating less sugar, when they say, oh, I have a kid that comes in, he's super fat, and I just tell him stop eating sugar, you know, what does that really just means he's going to stop eating a lot of processed crap. And what else is with that sugar? Like it's not like he's taking a bag of, you know, sucrose, right, and he's just eating straight out of the bag sugar. He's eating donuts and pretzels and what kind of other shit that has a bunch of additives. So it's so hard to pinpoint, if you're really thinking about it, that it's just the sugar causing all this obesity and whatnot. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, they kind of talk about that later in the conversation. Like, doesn't Peter ask the question of like, how do we really know like fructose is causing the problem?
Yeah, and he doesn't answer that. It drives me crazy.
Or okay, so there's like, what causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? Import, export of fatty acids, de novo lipogenesis, and then they start talking about insulin resistance for a long time. And then they talk about cortisol, insulin resistance, and getting the blood sugar. Oh, and this I mean, might be jumping ahead too far here, but he says getting the blood sugar down is half the battle, and insulin might be more important. And then they talk about, Kyle, something you know a lot about, like the hepatic gluconeogenesis, increasing the glucose in the blood, and then that driving this like whole conversation was like really difficult to listen to. But again, there were little parts of it that were talking about like the stress metabolism, and I just thought everything was out of context and weird.
It was totally because, like you said, because they came in with of course we know that fructose is bad. So
yeah,
and from that, let's talk about all this other crap. And it's like, hold on,
about how fructose is bad.
About how fructose, because we already figured it out and we know.
Right. It's just a circular conversation.
Well, I diverted things, but Kyle, what was your take on fructose increasing uric acid? Like, what was your?
Well, that's true. But most gout patients don't consume a lot of, like, most gout patients. The average gout patient sounds like outpatient. A gout patient clinic is, an old person who has poor health in general, like just doesn't have a good lifestyle and doesn't have a particular diet or anything, and just eats junk food. And a lot of times they are told to stop drinking alcohol, like specifically wine. And there's like some fish proteins have more things that end up becoming uric acid, or just a lot of animal meat in general. So it's actually like the uric acid thing and gout. I don't really think fructose has played a major role in that. They just add it as something that's bad. But how much uric acid actually comes out of the fructose? Not all that much. It's just something that happens also, and it happens also to a lot of foods. And he did say something funny, though. He said that it inhibits nitric oxide synthase.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to it, and I was like, oh no, not my heckin' nitrous rhinos.
I wrote that down. Uric acid bad because it inhibits endothelial nitric oxide synthase. And of course, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and they just assume like that's the only way to have vessel dilation is nitric oxide. So if you and again, it's not like it inhibits it completely and these vessels are just collapsing and constricting. So it's just, is that a big, that's the thing. Some of these things, they talk about numbers, and then some of them they don't. And when they don't talk about numbers with people like this, you should kind of just throw it out, because it's just another factoid. It's like bananas are browning because of the amino acids getting the Maillard reaction. Like I don't know how much uric acid in the average person ends up coming from their dietary fructose, and what level of nitric oxide synthase inhibition that uric acid then goes on to do. But I would bet quite a bit of money that it's like clinically insignificant in basically the entire population. Maybe if you have active gout, you could look into limiting fructose in addition to the other foods that contribute to uric acid, as well as other things that could help clear it. And maybe if you have some type of weird deficiency in nitric oxide, which that would be a rare problem because it's something that's supposed to be generally low, then you could look into that. But to talk about, because they're going back and forth between like kids that are fat in his clinic and then these really boutique molecule problems that it's like the fat kids in Lustig's clinic are not gout patients. You know what I'm saying? Those are two different, like they're not related at all. They don't have like anything similar about them. Except fructose, I guess.
Fructose is the bad guy. We figured it out.
Yeah.
Podcast over, guys. Talk to you later. See ya. Well, but they talk about insulin resistance a lot, okay? And I wanted to just, Kyle, could you just give us like a 101 on insulin resistance, maybe how it happens? What is insulin resistance? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's used to mean a lot of different things, but I guess the most like objective definition would just be when you have a certain level of less blood glucose disposal from the same amount of insulin present in the blood. So like you can expect a normal range, even if you were to intravenously just give people exogenous insulin and then you were to give them exogenous glucose. That's the best test for insulin resistance, is the hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp, where you're hooked up to two things and you're getting insulin and glucose at the same time. And they can tell how sensitive you are to the insulin by how much insulin they have to, or no, I'm sorry, how much glucose they have to titrate up.
Or how much insulin goes up.
Well, no, so the insulin they keep the same because they're giving you insulin. So they're giving you a graded dose of insulin, and then they're targeting a blood glucose. And if you're super sensitive, then their amount of insulin they give you will just drop your blood glucose, and they'll have to give you a lot of glucose. Now, if you're not sensitive to insulin at all, they won't have to give you any, they'll have to give you very little glucose because the insulin is not causing the glucose in your blood to go down. So that's the most basic definition, is the glucose, the effect of blood glucose from insulin.
And in diabetics, what happens in diabetics?
They have insulin resistance.
Well, I mean, is there a specific definition where it's like this amount, insulin, this amount, glucose?
No, although I think doctors can give a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes from a fasting blood glucose from 2 or 3 visits that's over, is it 110, or do you remember, Danny? Yeah, there's a fasting glucose, because the hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp is a little bit more expensive, and it's a nice, there's a few different ways they do it, right? They'll also do a glucose tolerance test where they give you 100 grams of glucose in a beverage, and then they'll take your blood glucose once every probably 15 minutes or so for a couple hours to chart how fast, how much your blood glucose goes up and then how fast it comes back down. So there's different ways to diagnose it, but I don't know exactly the cutoffs. But there's usually not a lot of people in between. Usually people are sort of in the normal range, or they're like quite impaired at
Very
glucose.
high. Okay, and then glucose versus fructose, when we're talking about insulin in that whole system.
Danny.
Kyle got tired.
Well, isn't it more useful to bypass that? Okay, so if we're talking about insulin resistance, you have to invoke kind of the Randall cycle and the competition between fatty acids and glucose. And then fructose is useful because it bypasses a pivotal point in glycolysis that is blocked by free fatty acids, as well as activates the essential pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme that is impaired in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, by the way. And so then, and they didn't really get into that. So that's my limited understanding. But and also, yeah, the increased thermogenesis and increased carbon dioxide, of course, they didn't talk about at all. And thermogenesis is impaired in obesity and aging and stress. And but yeah, just being more easily metabolized in a stress state, and hence useful.
Yeah, and so fructose gets taken up by the liver more often. That's another thing they brought up, but he said it's good in the sense of that if you're he doesn't think it's good, because athletes and sports drinks and stuff think it's a good thing to have fructose, right? Because you get it taken up by the liver much faster than glucose. He doesn't think that's important, because he says over time, if you just eat the rest of the day and you eat food, it'll get replenished.
This was Rob Wolf's shtick too. It's like you have to like earn your carbs to like, you have to exercise.
That's a lot of guys' shtick, yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's totally. I don't know if we're contextualizing this in stress, but it's outside of that context of what I typically think about health problems, and so that's why it's kind of a useless footnote.
Well, so why does he think? What's his point with fructose and alcoholic fatty liver, not non-alcoholic NAFL, as they say? What's his point? What's he driving at there?
Okay, so one of the main statements he said was that de novo lipogenesis used to be thought of as a non-contributor to the fat in the liver, and he made a big point about, no, it's actually a huge component of it. And so I haven't sifted through all that literature, so I passed that one to Kyle.
Yeah, this is another funny numbers thing that this always makes me laugh. this is a little bit later in the talk, in the podcast. But he was saying, oh, people used to think that de novo lipogenesis from sugars, fructose and glucose as well, in the liver is, it only contributes to maybe 3% of the fatty acids that the liver ends up either storing or exporting to other tissues. But that's for like healthy, normal people. And for people that are can either consume a lot of fructose or have some type of metabolic disease or developing it, it can be as much as 25%. And I always think it's hilarious when people try to say, yeah, this is the main thing. This is the main thing. It's 25%. Mm-hmm. It's just like, okay, so if that's major, like, oh, it's just a huge 25%. It's like, what's the word you use for 75%? Because 75 is 3 times 25. So like, is there a word that's 3 times bigger than like major, main, huge, like bigly?
Rich piano.
Like, can we get Trump in here and like say that it's like
huge,
a really big? Yeah. So yeah, because I made this point that so even like let's say the range is 3% to 25%. So whether it's fatty acids that end up in adipocytes and eventually form obesity, or that stay in the liver and cause fatty liver, it's at the absolute least 75% of that is from dietary fat. At the least. Yet he then goes on to say, so by process of elimination, it's fructose causing this problem. Now, something that's contributing 25% could cause a problem, because if it's like compounding like 25, and say it's over time, it gets a progressive condition. You get a little bit of fatty liver. The next year you have a little bit more. And also the fat in the liver starts to mess with the liver's ability to not store more fat, so it becomes like a vicious cycle type thing. That's true, but again, you got to talk about that 75%. You can't just leave people hanging. Like, even if it was 75%, you probably still have to talk about the 25%, because that is sort of a big minority. But that's what you would use. You would say it's a significant minority. But if it's the other way around, and the thing you're saying is causing all these problems is the 25%, then the level of insincerity to not like even give lip service to perhaps the thing that's contributing 75%, again, at the least, right? Like in the worst condition of fructose and other glucose, but I guess mostly fructose conversion to fatty acids, in the worst case, it's 25%. This just seems kind of insane, and I see this all the time. Like, and that's motivated reasoning. There's no other reason, because he doesn't explain why. There's certain times when a small effect, like say you have the Bitcoin market or something, right? And the people that are driving the price might be like 10% of the buyers and sellers, because everybody else is just, you know what I'm saying? Like the action happens on the margins, and a lot of people can explain how that's happening. Like, well, if there's this significant minority that's going to sell at this price no matter what, and then that'll knock it down, and then there's the next segment that will sell at that, and it becomes this thing, so it's like at the margins these things are happening. But he doesn't develop that point. He just says, well, I mean, look, fructose can make 25% of the fatty acids in your liver, so it's causing fatty liver. Case closed.
If he's pro-saturated fat, that shouldn't even really matter, because won't the fructose be creating saturated fat? And so that's the thing that doesn't make that much sense.
I don't even know. I don't know his stance at all on all that kind of stuff. Do you guys?
I mean, he's interviewed by so many paleo people. Again, I don't know. I downloaded his book, but I haven't even flipped through it.
Yeah, but like you said,
he's saturated fat.
Yeah, I mean, they're all preaching to the choir, like you said. It's all kind of Rob Wolf and Dave Asprey kind of guys, No,
he doesn't say that, because actually my last note was dietary fat. Oh, because one of the things he says is dietary fat went down, intake or whatever, which that's debatable. I think it's been fairly steady in America, like dietary fat intake. I think it's probably gone up a little bit, but certainly saturated fat intake has not gone up. Like that's for sure, and it's probably gone down at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And PUFA intake has exploded.
Yeah, I was gonna say for some reason I think I just assumed that he was talking about saturated fat, but not the other. You know what I'm saying? I just thought
He's just talking about fat. Because if you look at a lot of charts,
so yeah,
if you just look at fat intake, it's fairly steady throughout the 21st or the 20th century. I think a few data sets show that it's gone up a little bit, but some data sets show that total food intake has just gone up a little bit. So like, then it's like, okay, is it absolute numbers or percentages? It's kind of fair to say that fat, it certainly hasn't changed that much, but it's the composition of what the types of fats are. And he never mentions PUFA. And so I haven't been following him for a while, like a seriously long while. Like I basically stopped following him in like 2012, a year after I was following him. I was actually, when you first told me about this, I was like, he's still around. Like I thought he got like
big time, my man. And now he's getting into being a lawyer. He's getting his fucking lawyering degree. So yeah,
a good move for him.
Well, is the idea that the fructose is promoting oxidative stress in the hepatocytes and then in fat gain, and that's what's the shebang? Because isn't PUFA or endotoxin much more likely to like really harm the liver and create activate the stress systems and mobilize the free fatty acids and produce fatty acids locally? Doesn't that make like infinite more sense than this extravagant argument surrounding fructose?
Yeah, well, so he doesn't mention PUFA, and of course he doesn't mention endotoxin. That is not something I would have expected, but because a lot of these people, and I was saying the last point I made, which kind of sums up what I think about this, is Lustig's brand the only one that cannot integrate PUFA, like the PUFA question? Because everybody else has sort of pivoted, because now it's like sexy to say maybe it's the seed oils, maybe the whole thing with like the hammer and the nail of like, who was sharing that?
Polysalads, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And it's like, what was the nail?
Well, to be fair, this was in 2018, and so that wasn't
insulin resistance. I'm pretty sure. Sorry, Danny. Say it again, brother.
Like, if this was in 2018, when did polysalads switch? That was like 2000.
It was within the last year, guys. A year and a half or so. It was very recently. I mean, very recently. Yeah.
Well, even like not just him though, but other people, like, because when I started doing my thesis project in graduate school, and then I went to the AHS in 2013 and gave a talk about it. That was when it was like really cutting edge to talk about PUFA and the hypothalamic inflammation thing. It was mostly around omega-6 versus omega-3. Mm-hmm. People were still saying omega-3 is really good and omega-6 is bad. That was 8 years ago. So a lot of people have been, I mean, there's mainstream publications that are talking about maybe the problem, all the health problems are from vegetable oil, like stuff in like New York Times tier journalism, and like from 2016, 2017, like this is so, and Lustig, I mean, whatever else you want to say about the guy, like he certainly seems very capable of keeping up with that. And like, if he saw that, like he should be capable of like reading about it and looking into the research and forming an opinion. So, his silence is deafening on the PUFA question. And it seems like it's just simply incompatible with his brand, because he's saying the problem, and he said this a handful of times throughout, is fructose presence, a lot of fructose and then a lack of fiber. That's like his thing, is the problem in our diet, the modern American diet or whatever.
Yeah, that was one big thing that I didn't enjoy. Is just like, they didn't say anything like you should probably eat this. He said eat real food, but whatever the fuck that means. I mean, what does that mean,
Yeah, didn't he show his hand when he talked about gluconeogenesis and insulin is the most important thing, and that gets you entwined with the whole stress system. And they, of course, they didn't go, and they went into it a little bit talking about cortisol and catecholamines, but again, that I think would be a more fruitful conversation in getting into that than, again, their starting point and where they went with it. But I mean, it's just a critique of a conversation.
Go ahead.
Right.
Right.
Well, I just have to confess, I have like chronological notes, and we skipped to
Let's go back to him.
the end of my notes, which is fine. So we did the de novo lipogenesis and then the insulin. And that's actually when I stopped listening. Like I said, I got to approximately 20 minutes left.
Yeah, the last 20 minutes, they just talk about real food, and they talk about him becoming a lawyer because he wants to, cut that shit out, to be able to, like you said, tax the sugar and do whatnot, create laws, because that's where, it's all stemming from, quote unquote.
Well, maybe we can get into the dopamine idea, but Peter's story about his daughter eating ice cream and them both think that it's a sign of being addicted to it.
Yeah, so just to let people know, there's a part where he talks about having, I think he said his 6-month-old daughter, right? That she was 6 months old, she's had nothing but breast milk for a while, and then they took her to the, carnival or some spot where they have, soft serve ice cream, and his assumption would be that if they give her some ice cream, maybe the cold would throw her off, or maybe she would just not understand what it is. But then immediately when she, had some ice cream, her eyes got big and she got all happy, and that was, so that means it's cocaine, and they're just giving his babies pure cocaine. Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I had a note on that. Yeah, baby's face lights up, means it's bad. Comparison to cocaine. This has become really tired. This is where I think Lustig's age is showing, because like he's not jumping on the PUFA thing, and he's not. The meme of sugar it's like structurally similar to cocaine, and it lights up the same parts of the brain. That's a very old one. That was actually in a comedy movie with Kramer from Seinfeld. Did you guys ever see that? He's like in a court. And
Seinfeld's
I don't know.
Not funny. Sorry, I have to say it. This is Seinfeld. This is my impression of Seinfeld. Hey, that's not blue. That's light blue. It's not funny. I'm sorry.
And then George comes in. Jerry, is this blue or light blue?
Little fucking bass player. It's just
and then Kramer's like zooms in. It's like, oh, that's green.
I don't understand if it's because I didn't grow up here or if I'm not. I don't know, but it's so not funny. I'm so sorry.
I'm actually disturbed that I grew up watching that show because I think I don't know what role it filled, but it definitely had like sociopathic, a vibe to it. But I loved it. Like growing up, it was my absolute favorite show.
A lot of my friends did too, man.
That and Simpsons, and so I'm wondering, and those are of course like Simpsons especially intertwined with weird occult things and things. So I'm like disturbed that those were like my main sources of entertainment growing up.
All right, man. I can show you guys some Russian TV shows. You guys will freak the fuck out. You'll be like, what is this? You know what I mean? It's culturally, but I don't know. Honestly, I was like, do you guys find this funny? Like seriously? That and Friends. I'm sorry. It's just, I can't do it.
Friends did not age well.
Yeah, Friends was.
It's awful. Fun. Just stop. It's not funny.
When I was a little boy, I was quite taken by the romance between Ross and Rachel. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And I still think Seinfeld's funny, though. I think it's an English first language. Yeah. It's got the slap bass. It's great.
God. All right. What were we talking about?
I was saying there was a movie, I think it was in the 90s, where the actor, was it Michael Richards, who played Kramer? It's kind of like a buddy comedy or something. He ends up in court. It's like a road trip, and they're in some town, and he gets busted for something. And he gets a lawyer to get him out of it. And they try to use, like the classic like insanity defense. They use a defense that he's a sugar addict. And it's literally Kramer, right? Michael Richards in court pretending to like eat a bag of sugar. And then his lawyer is like talking about how it's the same as cocaine. You guys should watch this. This would actually be really interesting to like look at the messaging from that.
We'll check it out.
But it's just like an old like in the 90s when it was like empty calories. That was the phrase for candy and soda. And it's like, if you're still saying that, then that says that you're not really like with it. You're not hip. And so Lustig's not really hip. I think he got like popular enough that he kind of just ride his own thing. But I think he's just like, it's like a plane and like the engine's turned off, but he's gliding. And because there's no there. He's just saying the same thing as he was saying 10 years ago. And a lot of things have happened that are interesting. And he's just not about any of that. But what I wanted to say, and this actually ties back to the other one with the sugar substitutes podcast, the artificial sweeteners, is this Peter Attia guy and the people he talks to. He kind of brings this like teetotaler, like like if something's pleasurable or whatever, then it's like inherently bad.
Yep.
Like he brings this vibe, and it's very like pretty obvious, right? That he's like, oh well, you know, like the baby really liked the ice cream, and kids really like, and I remember Lustig also said, he was like, oh, do you know how many times it takes to introduce a savory food and get a child to accept it? And it's like 13 times or something is the mean. And then
sugar is once, just once.
Yeah, it's like, so you're abusing children.
Yes.
Like you're
well, even
like,
if they,
I don't like it. Like,
even if they are starting from an evolutionary paradigm, why, if we evolved to gravitate to sweet things, why would it inherently be bad to like, it doesn't make any sense on the face of it. They're just assuming that sugar was not plentiful, like in our evolution, or that it was scarce. And then they're riding that out from that point, you know, like I don't even, it makes, yeah, you're right. Lustig's view seems like an old relic, and so does Peter's. You know, Pauly Salads, he at least is adapting the times and monetizing his personality and things. But this was like taking a time machine and listening to health content, which it is a few years old. Was this first one? Was that 2000 this year, 2020?
The Lustig podcast?
No, the first one they're talking about sugars.
That was just recently, very recently. Yeah.
Oh yeah. He reminds me of like a self-serious Sam Harris type.
Yeah. Totally.
That's what I was thinking of it. Like,
fuck! I'm so glad you brought that guy up. God, I feel the same way as you do, Danny. God damn it. He works.
There's a podcaster called Brett Van Nott. He does the School Sucks podcast, and he sounds exactly like Peter Attia. Like the voice and the cadence and everything, they just sound the same.
And just to add to that Peter Attia thing, you were talking about that he's like, you know, if something tastes good, it's inherently bad. And it's true, and he talks about that. Is this? Am I talking about the same thing, by the way, guys? When he talks about the mangoes, did he talk about mangoes with you? Yeah, where it's like, you know, he talks about, you know, this dried mangoes that I can just eat the whole bag, and he says it like you said, like he just sucked a dick, and like his wife was watching it, right? He was like, I just ate the whole bag, and oh my god, like I couldn't do. Why would I do that?
And he has another quote towards the end saying sucrose of course tastes amazing, and then 2, his co-host says he can't get enough juicy fruit gum. Like he's chewing it all the time. And so I wish we had started with this one, because I thought this one was more funny, and I thought they were giving away their hand, like they were resisting the taste of sweet with all their might, letting the audience know like how awesome like sugar or something that tasted sweet was. And I thought that was totally bizarre, but yeah.
You know, I gotta give it, like, I just have a little bit like of a, because okay, when my low carb days, you know, you guys were there too. I mean, you guys were, I don't know, I think you guys were maybe a lot more committed to it for a longer amount of time than me. I would just kind of eat low carb, and then I would fucking binge on the weekends like a motherfucker, right? So that's what I'm trying to point at. Like I kind of have this almost sympathy for him, because I'm like, I think that's like you guys said, that he's just craving all that stuff. And I think over time, those cravings get bigger and you keep going. But what I did notice is when I started switching over to a higher carbohydrate diet, is those cravings kind of went away. And like, you know, whereas I would eat a whole pint, you know, of ice cream, now I just eat a half a pint and I'd feel fine. Like I wouldn't want more. Whereas before I'd eat a half a pint, you know, a whole pint, and then some cookies, and then some of this, and then some of that, and some Coke, and then just keep going. You know, that whole kind of old school bodybuilding, you know, 70s style diet where you're eating for 5 days, you're just eating low carbohydrate, you're just restraining, and then on, you know, Saturday or Sunday, you're just all over the place. So, yeah. So I kind of understand why he's doing that, I think.
I can't speak for Kyle, but I know that I was never really tempted my carbohydrate the 2 years I was doing meat and water. Probably because one, I had so thoroughly convinced myself it was the absolute worst thing you could eat, and then two, I think my metabolic rate was so ridiculously low. Like I'm sure I didn't need much to get by, but that's my take on it. Now it seems unimaginable. And to speak on what you said, and Kyle can probably clarify this, but I think the liver's glycogen content can make a person, if it's full, you don't want sweet things. Like your taste for sweet maybe being some kind of sensor or something for your liver's glycogen supply. But yeah, Kyle, what was your experience? Were you holding back the time you were on zero carb or raw primal rather?
At that point, pretty much my whole life, I never really had all that much of a sweet tooth.
You're a different kind of fella.
Yeah, it wasn't really that big of a deal for me. Like the foods, that I would have wanted would be, savory, maybe like.
You're a chips kind of guy, huh?
Potato chips. Yeah.
Chips and guac or some shit or some pico de gallo.
Something like that. Or it's just like going out to a restaurant, like it's like Thai food or Indian food or something, and just eating rice and like whatever carb comes with the food,
So you're a savory.
That would have been like my first choice. Although I like ice cream though. I generally like and also the candies with fat, like peanut butter cups and stuff like that. I've always liked that more than just pure sugar candy. So to me, the because I preceded low carb with raw vegan, and so I went through a period where I did a mostly fruitarian, and like if somebody told me I had a medical condition where I could never eat fruit again, I'd be like, darn.
So you don't have. Oh, okay.
Chirimoya, have you ever had one?
Oh, dude, get out of here.
I forget. I feel like I tried every weird fruit when I was a fruitarian, but I might have forgotten what it's like.
That's a delicious one.
I think Mark Twain said it's like what do you say? It's like the
yeah,
best
I've heard
fruit.
that, right? That it's like the most tasting fruit in the world or some shit like that.
Agree. They're like, it's like a complex but weird.
It's got to be a good one though. Yeah, it looks like a fucking turtle's asshole kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's all like lumped up like that. Yeah,
like
seriously.
Animal kind of how it's composed.
It's so good. Sometimes they're not good though, because they, if you have small ones, if they're, I don't know. So I've had some bad ones though, but if it's a good one, it's a delicious one.
We did jump over to the sugar substitute thing. The one other thing I wanted to say about that podcast is I've never found myself thinking about that kind of stuff, because to me, I don't like the taste of artificial sweeteners, and I don't require the taste of sweet as like I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not like baking cookies, and it's like, oh man, what am I going to do? And also I don't think sugar's bad. So like there's just a bazillion reasons why that's not a problem for me. But even more than that, I feel like on an aesthetic level, there's something really low aesthetics about I'm going to make something and let me like go on a website and look at the best artificial sweetener to use in this baking product. Like it's like, okay, just don't make like
I'm with you.
There are ways to substitute things. Like there's probably a hip restaurant, in Manhattan that's like, oh, we're like a Korean bao joint, but like we use this kind of meat instead, and it's like
it always
fusion.
tastes like shit, dude. It always tastes like a worse version of that shit. Seriously.
Well, I'm just saying, like, what's the worst is vegetarian fake meat, and because it's just like, okay, what are we doing? Like,
just don't eat meat. If you don't want to eat meat, if it's so bad for you, don't fucking eat meat. Yeah, that's how I feel about it.
I like how Kyle thinks it's like bad optics.
Yeah. It is bad optics. It's because you're like fetishizing this object, kind of like what you were saying about when you're restricting yourself from any sugar, and then you're just if you eat any of it, you might binge on it, something like that. It becomes this weird. Just really weird thing, and I just think it's kind of gross. Like there's so many foods you can make and so many things you can eat, and it's people want to like not change their lifestyle. Actually, it's like, oh, I know how to solve all my problems. Like I'll just stop putting sugar in these things I make and put like monk fruit sugar or the isomer, not isomer.
What's the word? Sweet and low.
The
sucralose.
Fructose. Enantiomer, the different-handed fructose molecule. It doesn't.
Know. What's that one?
You mentioned it towards the end. It's like the opposite of fructose or something, right?
Allulose, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Allulose,
That's fructose,
I think it's called.
But it's an enantiomer, and it doesn't metabolize.
He says during the beginning of the conversation, the way fructose is, the structure makes all the difference in the world, and then they never get to it. Like I don't recall them ever actually expanding on that point. Am I wrong? Did you guys hear that?
I think you're right about it. What is this? What is the difference?
Yeah, I actually have some early notes on this.
Let's go back to the notes.
So let's see. Fructose mostly. By the way, fructose is mostly converted to glucose in the small intestine, like at a bare minimum 50% and up to 90%. Now, if you force feed, because this is another bait and switch or Mott and Bailey thing that the fructose people do, is they'll take a lot of rodent studies that use huge gavage doses of fructose to overwhelm the absorption. Cause gastrointestinal symptoms, cause a bacterial change in their gut microbiome from all of that sugar, and overwhelm the liver. So that would be the equivalent. And I guess you could do it. I mean, I guess there's people that drink 10 cans of Coca-Cola or something, and on top of regular food. I guess you could induce these symptoms. But a lot of these things are not like physiological, and normally it just makes glucose the same way as the glutamate and glutamine amino acids are generally used up and either transaminated or metabolized by the small intestine before they get into the circulation. It does this with a few things. Like the small intestine kind of has first pass, and then liver has first pass in the portal blood. So the gastric emptying goes into the portal blood, and then the liver gets at it, and then the liver because that's the other thing is other tissues can take up fructose, just not as well as the liver. But the reason why the liver basically takes all of it up is because it gets first dibs at everything. It takes up most of the glucose too, if glucose is really high coming in. The liver enzymes that take up glucose are very concentration dependent, so that after you've absorbed your meal and everything, it stops taking up glucose because the other tissues need it, and then after a while it starts putting it out, so it can't be putting it out and taking it in.
So if it was a different organ, hypothetically speaking, it would take it out. It would take up the fructose first. That's just the way it goes. Just because you're saying liver does that first, just because.
Well, it would take up some of it. It would take up I think there was one. I was searching around to look at relative numbers and stuff, and KMs of enzymes and crap. And the kidneys, if you inject fructose, kidneys, other organs will take it up. It's just that the liver basically takes it all up. But even then, that's just the bit that didn't get converted to glucose by the small intestine. So again, this is kind of a bait and switch where they talk about fructose as a problem, and they'll say the molecule fructose can do this. And then they'll say a lot of they'll talk about the effects of fructose intake, and most of that is from studies of an enormous force feeding intake on rodents to just totally push the phenotype, see how bad you can get the reaction by just giving a super lot. And then they bait and switch to that's what's happening to you when you drink some soda, when you eat some when you consume sugar in normal amounts or whatever. But it's not the same thing. Some of those same things are happening, but some of these things are dose dependent, and the fructose in the circulation. I mean, fructose does not spend a lot of time in circulation. So yeah, if you had a bunch of fructose in circulation, it may very well glycate a lot of proteins like hemoglobin and maybe some other transporter proteins. Maybe that would be bad, but that really doesn't happen,
There's no weird diseases or whatever. I'm just saying it just doesn't happen. You're saying in normal people that are whatever healthy, that doesn't, you don't have a lot of fructose circulating around.
Yeah, I think the most common genetic problem people have with fructose is an total absorption inability, and they'll just get diarrhea because it'll all go to their large intestine and pull water with it and make them have like watery feces, just like lactose intolerance.
Isn't one way to look at it that, like, again, there could be maybe issues with gigantic amounts of fructose or glucose, but in the package of sucrose, they support each other. Like, the fructose supports the oxidation of glucose, and they complement each other. And yeah, and that's the way you would normally find it in food.
That makes sense. And you were, just brought up our Latino friends. You were talking about. He also mentions that there's a gene that Latinos have, right? That for them, fructose is like particularly like just devil. It's just they're gonna grow horns on their head if they eat fructose. They get super fat from it. What's his reasoning there?
I forget the gene that he was talking about, but I mean. That doesn't really surprise me. It's just more of the same effect. But I mean, the problem is those communities, like, if you looked at their diet, I mean, there's probably a lot going on there, like with oils and all kinds of things.
Yeah, fried tortillas and all kinds of shit like that, right?
If you go to a grocery store here, they Mexicans are super all about starches, and so they'll smell, at least now, I don't know how it was 20 or 30 or 50 years ago, but there'll be a line, like an Apple iPhone line for bread, every time to like a grocery store. And then vegetable oils are literally everywhere. Like coconut oil is actually a total rarity. Like you won't find it anywhere. And if you do find it, it's extremely expensive. And so I think it's only here because of like gringos here. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a lot of stuff that's fried, and all of it is fried, and it's not fried in butter, right? That's been your experience, right, Danny? Yeah, it's a lot of beans, rice, tortillas, and all that stuff is cooked in usually vegetable oil, usually canola, I think, right? I mean, but some of those shitty oils, eh?
Correct. Yeah. What did we not cover about? We talked about the juicy fruit gum. Sucrose tastes amazing.
I whenever you guys want, I do have one more note. Because this was actually my favorite part. My favorite part of these things is
about soccer.
No. When they have a throwaway line, like the thing where he's like, oh, because like bacteria are plants, or because and it says a lot. So at one point, Lustig says stress and sugar consumption in rodent maternal studies induce epigenetic changes that predispose offspring to metabolic syndrome. So I know exactly what he's talking about, because this is something that I participated in. And what he means by stress is, in rodents, right? In these rodent studies, is more or less the physiological state you would get from, for example, like a low carb or zero carb diet, like the basket of hormones and high lipolysis, and all that kind of stuff. So, but what he means by high sugar intake, is rodents that are fed high fat, probably high PUFA diets with added sucrose or fructose. I think it's usually sucrose. So I went back, because I had on my laptop folder, I was sitting when I was making these notes, I had a bunch of files from Research Diets, the company that makes, I think, most of the rodent diets in the world, and other companies basically copy their formulation. So I have all of because I had to report this for my studies, and I talked about it and everything. So the control diets, and this is just it's delicious. Not the diet itself, that doesn't taste that good, but this information. The control diets for lab mice, control diets. So if you just go, all right, I'm a scientist, I want a bucket of keep the rodents, mice, rats normal, and then I want a bucket of some type of experimental thing, like high fat, and I'm going to test this drug, right? It helps with obesity or something, or maybe you put a drug in the diet or whatever, and you'd have a control diet and you have the other one. So the control diet that everyone uses, like everyone, that doesn't make mice fat, okay, doesn't give them diabetic-like symptoms, metabolic syndrome type signs and symptoms, and maintains their fertility. Because I personally bred mice in, and we had like just colonies that we would just continually breed for different studies of different types of mice. Mm-hmm. And these are actually, and they're also C57 black from the Jackson lab mice that are predisposed to obesity and metabolic syndrome stuff. So true wild mice would even be more not fat from this. But it's let's see, it's called D. You can just look this up if anybody can look this up. Research Diets D12450B. So 12450B is the control diet. It's 70% kcals from carbs. And by weight, that's 67.3%. And of that 70%, half is sucrose. Mm. That is to say that 35% of the calories from the controlled diet that keeps mice lean and normal and consistently reproductive for use, like just permanent colonies of mice you can produce for studies. Mm-hmm. 35% of the calories are from not just carb, like sugar, like table sugar. Mm-hmm. So which also means it's 17.5% from fructose, right? Because
50-50 is sugar,
right? Mm-hmm. So, and the actual carb breakdown. So, like I said, it's 70% carbs, 20% protein, which is pretty much all casein, and I think they add carnitine, supplemental carnitine. And then 10% fat. And the fat is actually kind of bad. It's lard and soybean oil, but it's only 10% mm-hmm. of the calories. And of the carbs, it is cornstarch is 315 grams are added. And this is not percentage, but this is just how they report it. And so 1,260 calories out of, and there's a total somewhere else, but just look at the relative. So it's 315 grams are added to like a bucket of the cornstarch, 35 grams of something called maltodextrin 10, which is like a maltose and glucose together in some kind of, I guess, proprietary combination. And then sucrose is 350 grams. So like the lion's share of the carbohydrate component, which is by far the majority of the so anyway, that's a high sugar diet. Right. That's it right there. That your high sugar diet right there, your high fructose diet, your low fat diet, that's high sugar, right? So if sugar is making people fat or lab rodents, control diet should be causing all of these problems. Yet it is the diet with which you set against another diet that causes problems to make sure that like you're not fucking up, like there's not like poison in the room and all the mice are not just getting sick because the room is sick. That's what the mm-hmm. control diet's for. So you see what I'm saying here?
Yes.
They've done
kilograms.
We've actually like I could ask like, oh, when are they going to do a high sugar diet but low fat and really look to see if sugar is caught? And they've been doing it the whole time. It's the control diet.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to ask you, and because I've heard you talk about it too, have they ever done actually a high sugar diet and no fat diet, meaning at all whatsoever? Like, 2 grams or I don't know, 5 grams, whatever the fuck.
Done
ultra low.
In my dissertation, I report a couple of very high fat, like 60% and more, and they use saturated fat versus polyunsaturated. Or wait, no. I did a lot of different reviews of things, but no, this one was they had high fat, high sugar, mm-hmm. and then high fat, low sugar, mm-hmm. high sugar, low fat, and low fat, low sugar.
And what was high sugar? What was the percentage there to compare to low fat?
Oh, that's a good question. So let's just assume that the protein was 20%. So we've got 80% to play with. So I guess I'm going to say maybe 50 and 30. So 50% fat, 30% sugar, or maybe I don't think it was 40-40. How do I look back? It was a Japanese group that did it, and they did a couple studies with the same thing, and they consistently showed that the high sugar, high fat got fat, mm-hmm. but not really any more than the high fat, low sugar. The high sugar, low fat were the same as the low sugar, low fat, like the controlled diet. And again, low sugar, they call low sugar like this, say 30% of the calories or 35% of the that's considered low sugar. If that was the fat in a rodent diet, that would be a moderate to the, like my high fat diets were 45% fat. So that's not 50%. And that's considered a high fat. Now, again, mice are, rodents are different. So naturally they have a lower fat intake than humans. So like a 45% fat diet might be, a well over 50% of your calories from fat for a human to kind of compare. But still, they call low sugar. I mean, to these people, if you ask Lustig what low sugar is, he'd say no sugar.
Right.
So just as a comparison, like low sugar could be 25%, a quarter of the calories for a low, in these studies.
What were the 5% mice eating?
They were eating whatever it takes.
You son of a bitch, you snuck in a rich piano on us, man. That's pretty good. Do you have any more notes there, Kyle? Something specific?
Well, I'm sure I have tons of notes, but I think we should reflect on that for a second, because I feel like we've all broken new ground here, because I've never actually thought about it this way. Okay. Because for the longest time, I was challenging people, like at my talks, I was like, here's my email address. You send me a study that human, animal, some type of animal that is fed sugar, like a high sugar diet, but low fat, and has these metabolic syndrome or obesity results. Just go ahead and do that, because I have not been able to find that in the literature. And now, again, this is like 4 or 5 years ago that I was doing my dissertation, but I looked pretty hard. I looked around, and there's a lot of people that report that they use a high sugar diet, but every time it's the same thing as when they said they would report a high saturated fat diet and they were using lard, which at best is like a third of each, a third.
And just to clarify that, right? Because it's, when they're using lard, they say that it's saturated fat, but it's actually, what's the percentage that it could be unsaturated or, PUFA?
It could be more than a third PUFA.
Yeah, so a lot of vegans get this one wrong. The
majority of that is linoleic acid.
Right, and a lot of vegans get because people say that it's a diet that they fed a lot of fat and they got fat, and it says lard, but so people assume it's just it's saturated fat. It's almost all saturated fat, and it's not true. So you said it's almost a third unsaturated, or at least a third. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's around a third, and it really depends on the source, but. And as a comparison, like there are places in the world where pigs eat a lot of roots and stuff and scavenge for animals, and they could have a fatty acid content that's like, almost like beef, but with more monounsaturated. So almost like butter and olive oil sort of mixed together, whereas, these commercial pigs are like a third butter, a third olive oil, and like a third just vegetable oil.
Yeah, the meat is white. It's very weird. That's one very noticeable thing that when I moved to the States was like the pork is always like pure white, if you buy just standard commercial pork, whereas other countries it's like brown. It's more like, you guys call it boar here, but yeah, so anyway.
Well, they must be eating sugar, those brown ones.
Hey, they're getting browned. We got a couple of zingers here today.
But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody in the potential audience is clear that I just laid down the gauntlet here. I said that I'm not just talking about one study, right? I'm saying the entire institution of animal research on diets has proven that a high sugar, low fat diet, in the model animals that are used the most, these rodents, produces a lean, healthy animal, because these diets, the control diets, use a lot of sugar. And I'm sure there's people that for some reason choose to maybe have a formulation that doesn't have sugar, and those mice are probably also fine. But all I'm saying is the most popular, most widely used diet of all time from, this totally legit company that is considered the gold standard is a high, is 35% of your calories from sucrose high? I don't know.
It's
I think
high.
so.
Yeah.
It's higher than I eat.
Right. Right. Well, you had in your talk at the Health Symposium, is it the 2017 one, where you talked about the study, the guy that went on a super low fat diet, is a very old study.
Brown something.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
He was like a lab tech or some type of science assistant for. Is it somebody who was associated with the Burrs?
Yes, I think so. Well, they gave him a very low-fat diet. Maybe it was like 5 grams fat, and the rest was like a bulk of it was sucrose again, and maybe defatted dairy products.
Yeah. They tried to give him a zero-fat diet. They tried to get his because what they were trying to do was induce essential fatty acid deficiency. That was the point.
And what happened with that guy?
They weren't able to do it.
His migraines went away.
His migraines went away. He lost weight, right? What do you remember the name of that study or whatever, or just so people can look it up?
I have it somewhere. I could find it.
And that was the only of its kind that you ever found, huh? Where they kind of
there's clinical low fat, because remember back in the 70s and 80s, low fat was still king, dietarily speaking. The only problem was people weren't really differentiating between types of fat. And there was also sort of other cultural things happening at that time where people were eating more like processed foods and fast food and stuff. So it was like a weird combination. But if you wanted diet food back then, it'd be like a low fat Twinkie. You know what I mean? Like, so at that time they were doing a lot of research that was showing that people lost weight if they were put on, a low fat diet. It's basically the same thing as a low carb diet, except just without the cortisol.
Its effects of prolonged use of extremely low-fat diet on an adult human subject, 1942. And they say one of the most noticeable subjective effects of the diet was the marked absence of fatigue. The somewhat tired feeling usually experienced after a day's work in the laboratory disappeared within a few days from the institution of the diet. After being 6 weeks on the diet, he observed that these periodic attacks of headache had suddenly subsided completely. Strangely enough, they have never reoccurred. But you're right, Burr, Geo Burr was one of the people.
So this was a guy that was put on a high carb diet, very low fat, and lost how many pounds you lose there? 10, 15 pounds, something like that?
I think it's towards the end of the paper.
Yeah, it wasn't much because he wasn't fat or anything before, but he did lose a little bit of weight.
Okay, and then and did you want to point something else out about the gauntlet there? Because you laid down a gauntlet there. I don't want to.
Well, the problem with these people is, again, it's an elaborate Mott and Bailey, because it's absolutely true. There's a few things that are true, which is that fructose consumption increased in like mostly the latter half of the 20th century. And it has gone down. He let that slip. Did you hear when he let that slip? He said median child sugar consumption is 18 teaspoons, which is about 94 grams a day, and it used to be 120 grams. And he said it came down because of the obesity epidemic. This is another throwaway line. He said, it came down because of the obesity epidemic. Okay, so people are more conscious of not feeding children sugar. Has the obesity epidemic come down along with it? No.
The answer to that is no. Yeah.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't stopped. Like the increase in these issues has continued, even though pretty much from like the 20th to the 21st century, there has been at least a pause in the increase in sugar consumption, and in most demographics, especially like the traditionally health conscious ones, a decreased consumption. And yet, all this stuff like type 2 diabetes, obesity, and just all of it has not gone down with like back to like whatever, say the sugar consumption now is like it was in 1987, just for example, right? All of the metabolic syndrome and obesity is not back to 1987 levels. It's higher. So, how's that work?
We need more time for the browning to get
wash it
away.
out.
Wash out the browning, get a little bit lighter, and it's going to be okay.
More regulations on sugar.
Well, that's his next thing, right? You guys at the end of the podcast, he talks about that. He wants to get serious about it, and I don't know. I don't know.
I didn't hear that part, but I heard that he had gotten a master's in law.
Yeah, I don't know if he's
earlier.
getting it or gotten it already, but he wants to, start creating some laws against, all that good
Well,
stuff.
if he can't win a debate against somebody like me about why people should do this, then maybe he needs the power of the state. I mean, isn't that generally the calculation that people make?
That's what you got to do. You got to do what you got to do. Well, any more notes on the gauntlet, sir? The gauntlet?
Yeah, I have one more. This is my general outro notes, is that because when he said that thing that I mentioned earlier, where every diet that works utilizes real food as opposed to processed food, and so that's his mott, that's his easily defensible castle, and it's easily defensible because most people agree with it. It's not even specific enough to really attack, and it's it's actually probably in some ways correct, right? Because depending on what you mean by processed food, I mean, I agree with that statement. I largely agree with that statement. But the problem is he keeps forwarding this Bailey of sugar or fructose or whatever you want to call it is responsible. And sometimes he also says low fiber, but, is responsible for all these problems. So he's saying eat real food is the solution. But what the real solution that he should be forwarding is cut out sugar and eat more fiber. And I would guess if you could somehow do this experiment, which isn't really possible, but let's say you could magically de-sugar and add fiber to something that a normal person that's not diet conscious is eating, and maybe just increase how much they're eating to match the calories or whatever, however you would do this in a controlled fashion, I don't think you would decrease very much the rate of obesity if you just took sugar away and added fiber back. I mean, we're already seeing that the sugar is at least coming down, and that hasn't helped at all. I haven't looked at fiber. I would probably guess that hasn't gone up very much, but, so the point is he's like,
he shouldn't be saying just to increase fiber, like you said. His thing should be stop eating fructose. Don't eat fruit because it has fructose. It should be just all about sugar and fructose, right? Because if fructose is so bad, then don't eat fruit. But then they do that thing of where they kind of go, oh, well, but hold on. Apples come with fiber and have some minerals. So it's okay if it's a little bit of fruit. But like you said, I understand what you're trying to say, man.
Well, he's dog whistling. It's not really a dog whistle. He's telling the low carb people, he's saying something it's palatable, right? So if he said, he's saying something that's palatable to again, and like Danny said, he's a true believer. He's probably a true believer, but I think people, especially somebody intelligent like him, have a horse sense at the very least for how to speak to audiences in their market, especially somebody he's been doing this for a long time. He's obviously successful at it, one of the most successful people. And he knows that if he makes a declarative statement one way or the other, it's going to alienate a certain portion of his market. And so he has a market in mind, and he knows that there's low carb people that like his work and that support him and that will not if he says certain things. And then there's other people that are kind of oh, I just don't eat sugar, and they want to eat normal stuff and stuff like that. And so it's like this weird combination of trying to pretend like it's super scientific, but actually it's very focus group, political, just just do it's easy. Oh, it's easy, but actually we're all going to die if we did fructose, and this is the whole thing is caused by this, but actually just kind of eat normal food, and you can eat German bread is really hard. He's just throwing German out these weird facts.
Yeah, that was funny. German fitness bread. I was like, oh shit, you brought out the German fitness bread over here.
And so ultimately, I'm not convinced by the guy.
Me neither. Well, listen, I also wanted to ask Danny, because you've had a lot of experience with clients, right? And I just wanted to ask you, what has been your experience with telling people to eat more sugar? Not in the sense of how they respond to you at first, because maybe I'm sure some people at first are like, whoa, or who knows though. You do deal with a certain type of client, but I just mean, what has been their experience with adding more sugar in their diet? What kind of things have you heard from people that start eating more, and specifically sucrose, yeah, or maybe fruit, or not talking about all the starches and all that other stuff.
Yeah, the general things of a more pleasant mood to better sleep to better libido, all those things that people typically act on if are like extremely problematic. And so whenever I talk about this stuff, I try to wrap it in kind of this Hanselian, how do you say that? View of, I'm rarely ever talking about sugar and not trying to wrap stress around it, because I think that's the easiest thing to talk about. Like, everybody kind of knows their personal relationship with stress, and so we'll usually talk about that, and then we'll talk about carbohydrate. But occasionally somebody will just like peruse a YouTube video and they'll be like, I'm doing all this healthy stuff, I never eat sugar,
Of course.
And to explain it, and they'll be really taken aback, is that how you say it? Like, they'll be really weirded out that you have that point of view. And so then you'll have to say, oh, stress starts when the blood sugar gets too low, and then that increases like glucagon and adrenaline and squeezes the glycogen out of the liver, and like explain that aspect of it. But I think generally good things come out of eating carbohydrate, and especially sugars. But I'm not like bullish on it. I don't tell people like they have to eat this or have to eat that. I'll just give my point of view. And but other than people that have obvious intestinal problems, I really don't hear negative feedback on it. But that intestinal stuff is always a wrench into any food, any implementation of any new food.
So you've had people that maybe started eating more sugar and they told you they weren't just feeling funky, or what, the digestion was kind of off at first, or what's the deal with the
Yeah, well, sometimes I think the fructose malabsorption is kind of so many people know about that again, I'm not saying it's not real, but like if they eat it, they'll notice some kind of intestinal distress or something like that. But yeah, no, I'd say in general it's good. It's weird because I really don't ever think about this.
Well, that's what I'm here for. But do you think that's from maybe a lack of them not eating sugar for so long, that when they start eating it, like you said, then they're just feeling funky? But I mean, that could be like that with any food, right?
Yeah, no, so I wouldn't say that most people feel strange or something. I would say generally most people tend to feel better, or those symptoms that they associate with stress, they'll notice a reduction in those, whether it be better sleep or not being tense or not ruminating on negative thoughts and things like that. And so yeah, I'm always trying to like get into the person's, whenever I'm talking to them, I'm trying to think of like what they're thinking their problems are. And then throwing out ideas that might like mitigate those problems, and more carbohydrate is one of those things. But then we'll go on to different things if they've tried that, because it's such like a low level, pardon the pun, but low hanging fruit to like that. Like I would almost expect anybody that was talking to me has already done that. You know what I mean? That's why I guess it's weird, because I rarely ever talk about it.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. So,
Ray has that quote, and it's like, stress is the perceived need for sugar. So something like as basic as that. And I think he has another quote on the deeper level of like the failure to oxidize glucose to carbon dioxide is the oxidative stress, like in every tissue that's oxidative stress. Yeah. And so that is a good bouncing off place to all those complicated subjects, I think. And
you yourself, do you have like a set amount of sugar that you eat? And I mean pure sucrose. I mean, do you do experiment? Do you do like, I don't know, a cup a day or something like that? You have like a set number, or you just kind of go by feel?
I don't know if you can, I don't know if
you got some sitting right there?
It's like somewhere over there. It's just a big bag of beet sugar, and then I just like scoop it in my milk and we'll put it to taste. But I have to say, I'm not advocating everybody does that or something.
Of course.
Because that works for me. And, and the other thing is, like, I'm religious about eating liver, eating oysters, eating eggs and things like that. Like, if a person wasn't doing those things, that might be problematic to like get a huge amount of calories from white sugar or something. It just makes the milk taste better to me, and like so I can like power through like 2 or 3 of these easily a day if I'm adding sugar to it. But I have probably said this before, and I'd be interested in your guys' take. But like if I add too much sugar to milk before I go to bed, and I'll be like, oh my god, it's so sweet. and then I'll wake up and drink that same milk, and it will be way less sweet. And so that makes me think the glycogen is having some specific effect on the taste. And so when my glycogen is depleted through the nighttime, I have like a lower lower threshold for things that I find sweet, and whereas in the nighttime I had a higher threshold for it.
So you told us that last time, and I started thinking about it a lot. No, seriously. And I tried that out, and I started thinking, what if, like, there are just points in your day where you feel you need some sugar to, do all those things that you talked about, to lower stress, yada 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 yada. For me personally, it seems like nighttime is when I crave it the most. Like, I love having a big bowl of ice cream with some honey in there or whatever, and just laying in bed and just rubbing it all over myself. I love doing that. How about you, Kyle? You do that too?
Oh yeah.
Ooh. Ooh.
I'm pretty into like ice cream. I feel like, and this might be psychological, but there was some point last year, because all the crazy stuff with COVID and I wasn't going into work for a while because the labs, like, you weren't allowed to go on campus. All these weird things happened, and then I got COVID, and somewhere during that time I started having a little bit of sleep issues. And I've always been able to sleep really easily, a little too easily actually. Like, I could just sleep forever, and I can still sleep very easily. But I have noticed that if I at all try to limit my caloric intake, especially of carbohydrate and sugars, in the, say, last third to a quarter of the day, I will. And maybe I'm psyching myself out, but I will not fall asleep as fast.
Same thing as me. I don't know. Some people, I have talked to some people that prefer proteins, or, like light proteins like fish or stuff like that before bed. No, seriously. I was like,
sick.
I'm like you though. For me, I feel the best when I have some sugar. I found that out when I was doing one of these Vince Gironda diets one time, where you eat one salad a day for 4 days. Don't ask me why I did this, but so you eat just once. That's it, nothing else. Just one salad, middle of the day, for 4 days, and then after that you start eating a steak with like your morning. And you only eating twice after that. So 4 days of just a salad, one salad a day, big ass salad, and then 4 days of steak and salad. And yeah, after those 8 days, my sleep was so fucking awful. And I remember I went to the store and I got myself a giant pint of Ben and Jerry's. This is back in the day, and I was like, I just remember eating it, laying down in bed, and just butterflies just coming out of my body. I just remember.
You just reminded me of your biohacker post where you're like, it all starts with 4 days fast.
Well, those guys.
Like, oh no, big deal, just a 4 days.
I love those guys. They have their best intentions in mind, maybe, but yeah, man. Yeah, and then you got to stand on a vibrating plate, and you got to do that shit. So
I almost feel like, I think we covered a lot of ground here, but I almost feel like it's a bit late. Like, I feel like the nutrition realm or the advanced people have largely accepted that sugar is now not the issue. And me personally, I feel like the metabolic rate is the next thing. And so that is not really plugged into the equation. And so that, or carbon dioxide or whatever the hell, those things are the things that aren't really. Or
at least that word, metabolism, because, polysalids and all these guys, they have their continuous glucose monitors on, like, everywhere, all the time. They're on their forehead.
Ice bath.
Yeah, an ice bath. It's just like, and every time like I said, I try to tune into those guys just to see what's going on. And it's always something about, speaking of COVID, you don't want to get COVID. You got to make sure you have a good metabolic rate and blah, 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 blah. And they just know how to fix it all. Even though he got it, by the way. Did you guys hear? Pauly Sal's got COVID also.
I did watch that, yeah.
Aww. It's just you and him.
Well, not chatted about him too much. He did the whole animal what was it called? The animal he's really kind of went main mainstream with all the
Yeah.
inclusion of different foods and things that he's doing now.
So what's
He couldn't
doing
be
now?
farther away from a carnivore diet.
What's he saying now? The last thing I heard was just the COVID thing. I haven't followed.
I think this month is like 30 days of what did he called it? He called it like whole animal nutrition or something. But anyways, it's like almost exactly like a paleo diet. It's almost indistinguishable from a normal paleo diet from what we were hearing about in 2008.
Well, yeah, what are those guys doing these days? Those guys like Rob Wolf and Mark Sisson. Are they still doing the paleo diet? Or are they calling it something else, the keto diet now, or what? Do you guys know?
I haven't. Rob Wolf, I'll occasionally see like a YouTube video from. He seems like he's really off the map. And Sisson, I'm sure, is maintaining his empire.
Well, Sisson, Sisson moved to Florida. I forgot. He moved to Miami. He got all his money from that fucking mayonnaise stuff. And taxes. Yeah, you didn't know? Dude, he sold it to, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it was Nestle. He sold it to some big brand, some big company or whatever, and he's got a lot of money, and he was like, fuck that. I'm going to save all that and go to Florida, save all the taxes.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Wait,
what's it called? Marcanase?
Oh! I can't remember. I don't know. Yeah, boys. What else you got? I think we did cover a lot of ground. It was good though. What else is going on? Everybody, anything new? Any updates?
Well, I do want to. So what you were just saying about the paleo people, and because I'm working on a video right now about another like nutrition like philosophy of science video, and one of the components you just made me think of it is I'm saying that the paleo paradigm, and the paleo paradigm is kind of like the macrobiotic and a couple of other diets that never had the growth phase of like the fad of say vegetarianism or veganism, and now the low carb stuff. And the way I see paleo, it was like a vessel for the seed of low carb. And you can see the tension. Like Danny was around and really saw that there was this thing growing inside of it, and it consumed its host. And the people that hitched their wagon to like low carb first, paleo second, rocketed, just like jumped on the heads and like crunched the skulls of the people that were like, no, like carbs are fine as long as they're paleo. You know, those people just got left in the dust. In terms of, audience and relevancy on the internet and all of those kinds of things. And to summarize, the point that I'm going to be making in this video is it's because to have a popular fad diet, you have to have something that you're excluding. And that thing has to be important in people's lives. So vegetarianism excludes meat. Veganism, of course, excludes all animal foods, and low carb, it's in the name. So you need like we're against, to get that pop, to get that big critical mass that can create empires,
Strong horse, as you called it, eh?
Yeah, the return of the old gods. And So something like I don't know if you guys are even familiar with macrobiotic, but that's something that's been floating around alternative health spheres forever.
Yeah, like buckwheat
and it
noodles.
just never got that pop. Yeah, it's like seasonal eating and whole foods. Yeah, it's kind of based like traditional Chinese medicine adjacent.
Even when I'm raw vegan, I was like, this is not sustainable.
No, yeah, me too. I had the same thing. I tried it for, I don't know, a day or two, and it's just like, fuck, I don't want to eat like miso soup for dinner or whatever.
Types of sweet and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of, those chicks that are married to like 50-year-old dudes, that have like a lot of money, they're kind of into those diets, and they don't eat that much. They just hang out and eat soup and stuff.
Yeah, macrobiotic is basically a diet for somebody that was like wealthy and went to Whole Foods in like 2006.
Yeah.
It's like, exactly. I have a lot of money to spend at Whole Foods in 2007. I'm macrobiotic.
I like how your gnashing of teeth an analogy for moving forward with low carb, because that's happened again and again and again and again. And you're so right. You have to be progressive, and that's what typically happens. Or you're right, I don't know what Rob Wolf's situation is, but he is kind of like a distant character in the grand scheme of things. I hear nobody talking about him. And same with Dave Asprey. Like he seems to be totally eclipsed by carnivore, and now carnivore with honey and whatever's going on there.
What do you guys think is going to be the next seed? Where do you go from low carb though when you're just eating meat and vegetables? I don't know where you can take it. Well, carnivore, right? We got carnivore. Where do you go from carnivore? Is this the end of our transformation, guys? Has the mutation been ended?
Well, I think we've gone through a cycle.
Yeah,
like a full cycle.
Yeah,
and because there's always going to be a certain percentage of vegetarian and veganism. The low carb has reiterated, at least because there was Atkins in the 80s, and that was more of a focus on protein, and now this time around it's more of a focus on fat. I think that as low carb becomes discredited, first academically and with cutting edge things, and then popularly, there's going to be a fractioning, which we're already seeing, which is, there will be the people that will never, ever give it up. There will be the people that will just give it up and just keep saying that they're carnivore or whatever, and adding like honey and getting like 50% of their calories from carbs. And then there will be people that are the true vanguard, true believers, which actually never reap the benefits, which is another thing. I have this uncle that he actually passed away last year, and it was and I couldn't go to see him because of the COVID thing, which is my personal axe to grind about COVID. Uh-huh. But he told I don't know if you guys remember, like, things relatives tell you when you're really young, they just stick with you. Sure. And he told me when I was like in like high school, I don't even know what the topic was, but he said, the most brilliant people and the people that invent things are never really the people that benefit the most from it. It's always like the second tier. And so what I'm saying is actually that somebody like Amber O'Hearn, she's sort of inventing actually new content intellectually, and she's never going to reach like a Paul Saladino level of popularity because of this phenomenon.
That's not wrong, but I think Amber has more integrity.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's inverse to the success. So, like, yeah. she's like not marketing herself in a way, on purpose, because she's trying to do this other thing, and she's always going to be like more sophisticated and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, Harry Potter books sell way more than like some good literature that we've never heard of that was published in the same year or something.
Wolf is sort of an example of that, like you said, yeah, because he's just kind of back there doing his thing, and because he doesn't have that strong horse thing going on. Well,
when I used to do a podcast with Chris Kresser, he would be on. He had his own supplement line for a while. Like he was a
Element. Oh yeah. Those magnesium and salt and something like that. The correct ratios.
I think he had deals with gyms and being a practitioner. No, I think he was a big time business person. But again, Pauly Salad's taking it to new levels, I think.
Yeah, our boy Pauly Salad. Well, come on, we can't end it on him. We got to end it on something else, guys.
Well, so what I'm saying is I actually think that there isn't a next thing, because with the model that I'm putting forth here, a Ray Peat diet can't really become a fad in the popular consciousness because it does not exclude a dietary component, and I don't think PUFA is enough. I think that there will be sophisticated people that absorb that message and maybe even, make a diet around it and stuff. But I don't think what we're talking about in general can become popular the way that carnivore and vegetarianism can. So maybe something will just come out of nowhere and surprise all of us, but I don't see anything that's strong enough to take the reins from, because carnivore is kind of in a blow off top. Mm-hmm. like dumb money is like still going into it, so it's like still kind of going up, but all of the smart money is leaving.
I'll occasionally type in carnivore diet with quotes in YouTube, and I remember a time when there was like new video from popular like carnivore influencer people, and now it's almost like a ghost town. And so yeah, I think once all those people defected, I think you're right. I think you're totally right. There's going to be some kind of cycle, and it will end with Dave Asprey.
So you guys don't think though, just to be, you don't think there's going to be any guy that's like, super ultra repeat kind of, no starch, no PUFA, just like, the repeat inspired diet book.
I can't see a formulation of that.
Wears a hat. He has like a red light. He has around just like a strap that's around him at all times. And he's got like a headband with red lights around.
See, you sound like you're talking about macrobiotics. Like, you've already lost a significant. You know what I'm saying? It's like, wait, what does red light have to do with vegetable oil? Like, and why do you keep saying estrogen?
So you're saying it's a little too complicated at that point, huh?
Yeah, because these things are run on the operating system in the brain of religion. Okay, so they need to have a tenet that is that fits into those basically neurological pathways. And for whatever reason, cutting out meat and having that be the central thing of your way of eating, or cutting out animal foods in general, fits into that, which makes a lot of sense because that's actually been a religious practice for many millennia. And there really wasn't anything that was able to capture that energy because, of course, there were always diets. There was always low fat and stuff. But I don't think low fat was kind of played second fiddle to vegetarianism because it was kind of related, especially in the most of the 20th century, because, animal foods tend to have fat pretty much all the time unless they're intentionally defatted. So those ran together kind of like paleo and low carb. So it's almost like paleo was the vessel for the seed of low carb, the same way as like low fat was the vessel for the seed of like a hardcore vegetarian or a vegan diet. And I don't see another food item that you can say, okay, this is what we're against, and we're all going to come together and say all of our problems will go away if we cut this out.
Well, gentlemen, it's been great. So we may come full circle then. All right, guys. Well, thank you for the chat. Yeah. Anything else to add? Parting words?
Thank you.
DanielRyder.com, Kyle Mamounis' YouTube page, Nutrichronology. It'll all be linked. Hey.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Things you own end up owning you.